here's the thing. For everybody listening, don't make the same mistake the Bengals just did in any facet of your life.
People are going to get hurt. It's the hockey season.
What about the Jared Cook play on the sideline?
I was very tempted to just put defense.
I'm saying it right now. If Anthony Davis is out for the playoffs, they don't make it out of the first round.
Come on, Austin and I have been saying this ever since Joe Burrow got injured.
I don't really think the Dodgers are going to make the World Series this year. I feel like they'll make it to the NLCS.
The Fernando Tatis extension, because that really surprised me.
Like you said, Ovechkin, he's getting older. He hasn't been playing as well as I imagined. He's one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, but he hasn't started off this season as hot as I would hope.
Hi, I'm Jeff Allen, and you're listening to Outsiders Opinions with Kevin and Austin.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to our NFL Opinions of the Week. And I'm Kevin, joined by the man that posed the question, but also I will be having the discussion with for y'all to hear, and that of course is Austin.
Yeah. A lot of people say, Kevin, that like Eli Manning is more of a lock for the Hall of Fame than a guy like Matt Ryan. Even though if you look statistically, Matt Ryan is in the top 10 of a lot of stats and has won an MVP and wasn't really the reason why they lost the Super Bowl. It was more coaching and obviously their defense not being able to stop Brady. But what are your thoughts on that? How much does a Super Bowl matter to your legacy? Because there's guys like Trent Dilfer that I don't think it matters all that much for. We don't look at Trent Dilfer and are like, oh wow, that was great quarterback and he won a Super Bowl, so that makes him close to a Hall of Famer. But there's definitely a fine line, and I'm wondering which one you value more, or if it matters just circumstantially.
Yeah, so thinking about Super Bowls, and just like I also think the number of Super Bowls, we talk about Tom Brady and just the number of Super Bowls he has impacts his legacy, of course, as we've talked about the GOAT debate. I would say this is Super Bowl. Got it. I was thinking Super Bowl MVP.
No, this is Super Bowl or MVP.
Yeah. MVP. Got it. Yeah, that's... my vision is getting fixed, so I blame that on that. So I would say Super Bowl because that's the biggest moment. MVP, there is discussion like that. There's the regular season, and that's what the MVP shows. Then I'm looking at Super Bowl, and that's what everyone wants. It's great to have an MVP, but I'm sure Matt Ryan would choose a Super Bowl win over an MVP.
I agree partially, but I would say that Matt Ryan was a better quarterback than Eli. But there's some people that would disagree with that. I think Matt Ryan, again, I don't think he was the reason why they lost. I think he doesn't decide his play calls. He's not like Brady or Manning where they decide their play calls. He if you tell Matt Ryan to throw, he's like, okay, I'll throw the ball. He didn't throw any picks. He didn't have any. He did have a fumble. That's because his O-line completely crumbled and he got sacked within maybe 0.2 seconds. So, again, I still view Matt Ryan as the better quarterback. Maybe what would you want to do? Sure, I completely agree. I completely agree that I would rather have a Super Bowl than MVP. I think every player would. But if we're talking about what it matters to your legacy, who's the better quarterback, I think it's much more circumstantial. I would say if I had to rank the two quarterbacks, I would have Matt Ryan above Eli.
Yeah, Eli Manning is a tricky case. He's a quarterback that I used to feel like, no, he wasn't really that good. He got lucky. But then the more I thought about it, and I was like, he just seemed to come up. He wasn't a great regular season quarterback. He struggled. He was there for every game. He had the Iron Man streak going. But when it got to the playoffs, he helped knock off some of the top teams, and he knocked off the Patriots twice. Some with improbable catches, such as the David Tyree helmet catch.
Or the Mario Manningham in the other game. Both of the games had two of the greatest Super Bowl catches ever.
But to me, that speaks to the moment of Eli Manning and kind of rising to that moment. However, I don't know who I really choose between Matt Ryan and Eli Manning. I would say Eli Manning, given the Super Bowls. I know there are two improbable things we just talked about. But
let me put this, Kevin. Let me put this. the reason why, again, I'm not all that in love with Eli is, yes, he had 2 amazing playoff runs. But during the other playoff runs, he wasn't just not great. He was horrible. In those other, he made the playoffs in 4 other seasons, Kevin. In those 4 other seasons, he had 3 touchdowns. In those 4 other seasons, he had 7 interceptions. 3 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. This is in the playoffs. In those other 4 playoff terms, in those other 4 playoff games. He had he had sparks, yes, where he had a great playoff run, and then he'd be the worst player in the playoffs. He'd have a playoff game where he would throw no touchdowns and 3 picks on 113 yards. Or throw 2 picks on 169 yards. I think we get masked by the greatness of 2 runs than him being a great playoff player. I think the difference that I would say is, again, I always go back to Joe Pavelski, but Joe Pavelski, basically his entire career, we can say maybe not his last season, but every other year, he was very great in the playoffs. It didn't matter which season it was. He didn't have one that like carried his goals. But in Eli, it's 2 seasons. It's not every time he made the playoffs. If he'd only made the playoffs 2 times, I probably would have him above Matt Ryan. Because there's not those glaring games where he's just horrible in the playoffs. I still remember that one against the Packers in 2016 that I thought Eli was atrocious in. Now, maybe it was because he was getting older and all this other stuff, but I would say Matt Ryan was a more consistent playoff quarterback than Eli was. In some of the games, like when his worst games, the games that he was losing, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. 1 touchdown, 2 picks. No touchdowns, no picks. Those are much better than 0-3. Or 0 touchdowns, 3 picks. 0 touchdowns, 2 picks. And again, in those series, some of the games he lost. Again, in that series, or in that run to the final or to the Super Bowl, he didn't throw any picks. 9 touchdowns, 0 picks. In the other game that he lost in Atlanta against the Eagles, he threw no picks. He doesn't ever throw his team out of games. Again, his last playoff game of his career, when he lost against the Eagles, he threw 210 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. Is that utterly outstanding? No. But he doesn't have the low points in his playoff career like Eli does. And that's what really speaks out to me. Yes, winning a Super Bowl definitely matters. But I feel like Eli is just either the greatest quarterback on the field some games or the worst. Well, I don't feel that way with Matt Ryan. And again, Matt Ryan's had the highs of winning an MVP and being, again, remarkable in a lot of different instances. And I'd also say this for like a Nick Foles. Again, I'd say Nick Foles, he did have one great season in the regular season where he had 27 touchdowns and 2 picks. And also a great playoff player. But I don't think we could sit here and say that he's better than Matt Ryan.
No, we can't say that. I do agree with the inconsistency with Eli Manning versus the consistency of Matt Ryan. However, to the question of which is more important to your legacy, given kind of the debate we're having about Eli Manning versus the consistency and inconsistency, Eli Manning has 2 Super Bowls. It's what it boils down to in most conversations is who has more rings. And you can get into the nitty gritty of it. And I do agree there is a discussion to be had about Matt Ryan and Eli Manning. But to me, I would say Super Bowls over MVPs, given in the discussion about Eli Manning, I view 2 Super Bowls. He accomplished that feat twice. Now we could get into the trickier discussion of Nick Foles, which is just 1. I think multiple Super Bowls.
Well, again, does it not matter that you're not the best player on your team? Does it not matter that, again, the Giants have one of the best D lines in football or a lot of other things? I feel like we look at the quarterback as the whole team when it's not necessarily the case.
Yes. So we've had this discussion multiple times. And to me, today, now, the quarterback has to be the best player. When Manning won, he didn't have to be the best player now. But
Peyton or Eli, if we go 2015, 2015 Denver.
Peyton Manning's the last one. before to me now where you had to have the best quarterback or one of the better quarterbacks. Peyton's the
What
last
about
one.
Nick Foles?
I guess Nick Foles, is the last one. Oh yeah, I was listening to a podcast. Sorry, I was listening to a podcast and they forgot about Nick Foles, and I just forgot about Nick Foles. So Nick Foles is the last guy. Except
this is my problem, really, is that I wouldn't say the best quarterback has won the majority of Super Bowls except for if we look at Mahomes and Brady. So we take out Mahomes and Brady. I'd say Burrow was better than Stafford.
Burrow was better than Stafford. Stafford did lead game-winning drive. I know
He led the game-winning drive after they called a PI on Logan Wilson. We've had this conversation, Kevin. You know this conversation.
I know, but I'm still saying
he should not. He didn't deserve.
Just look at the history. What does the history say? He led a game-winning drive.
That's you're looking at Kevin. We have the luxury of ignoring people who don't watch the game and are like, "Oh, he led a game-winning drive." We know the semantics around it. Those semantics make a moment grander or worse than it actually is. I think what makes, again, I think watching the 28-3 comeback made it more incredible than actually looking at the stats. Look at the stats, you're like, oh, he fumbled and they should have ran the ball more and all this other stuff. But watching the game, I think it made it a lot more like, how is this possible? How are they down 8 with 3 minutes left? How did they have the ball?
I can understand that. My point with the Rams thing is it's the refs. You can't. I like how Jason Kelce. I don't want to get into the debate again. We've had the debate.
No, but my point is that I think Burrow was the better quarterback. We can say who led the game-winning drive, but that's on the okay. Let's put it this way. Let's ignore the terrible call and all that other stuff. It's on the defense. The Joe Burrow doesn't give up the game-winning drive. The clock runs out. Right?
That's fair. Yeah, you're correct. In that, but. Man, you have to have a top tier quarterback. You can't win a Super Bowl with a quarterback that doesn't play well.
I disagree. Again, if we go back to 2019, Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry were up at half, and they almost beat.
I'm viewing like to win a Super Bowl, you can't have a quarterback in today's age.
I think the only reason why people think that is because of Mahomes and Brady.
That is a good point, but I still think Matthew Stafford wasn't terrible. Nick Foles wasn't terrible. To me, if I'm building a team, let's
put it this way.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. If you have a starter in the NBA, they can't play terrible and you win a title. Like you can't have in a video we talked about not that long ago. We talked about Trevor Ariza shooting 0 for 12. Like you can't be terrible. Sure, I'll give you terrible. I'll give you throwing the game away and throwing 5 picks. I'll give you that. You can't be the worst player in NFL history and win. But I do think there's a gap where I do think you can win a title with a less than stellar quarterback.
To me, those are rare. And I will walk it back if it happens, but I don't see that happening.
Since 2010, it's happened a good bit.
Well, I'm saying in the age that we're in now for the football, which lasts 5 to 7 years, we'll call it that.
And Mahomes and Brady have won how many of those? All of them besides 2?
Yeah.
It's in one of those in the last 7 years, right? You said 5 to 7, so I'm going 7. It'll lead back to 2017. That's Nick Foles.
Yes.
And the other one that wasn't Brady or Mahomes was 2000, was the Matthew Stafford year when he led the league in interceptions. So you're the interception leader, and Nick Foles, who started 3 games all during the regular season, and then you have Mahomes and Brady. I'll give you the Mahomes and Brady. If you have a GOAT, yes, of course you can win more titles with that.
What's the percentage of 2 over 7?
Again, you're ignoring the greatest players.
28%. Well, I'm just saying, if we're talking about with what I'm saying, that's 28%. That's rare.
I'll give you this: when you have an absolutely GOAT level quarterback, a top 3 quarterback of all time, it is almost impossible to beat them with a not great quarterback. So when that not great quarterback plays against them, in almost all instances, that not great quarterback will lose. But I think if you have a star quarterback, they will lose more often. Yes, we can bring up Nick Foles, but the difference with Nick Foles is that Brady didn't play bad. But Brady had the greatest, maybe, Super Bowl of all time by a quarterback, 500 yards and so many touchdowns and no picks. He did have one fumble, but that's because his O-line was horrible during that one play. But I think it's more the fact that the Patriots defense, which was ranked 30th all year that year, ended up being bad because they were bad. And that's where you could do it. But it's, again, 2 over 7 isn't even that crazy a percentage when we're talking about titles, winning titles. If you're a team, right, eventually you're going to win one. If it's only 28% of the time that you can have just a mid-level quarterback,
I wouldn't say Matthew Stafford's mid-level. He's upper tier.
He's not elite. I never had him in my elite. I wouldn't have him in my elite. Again, can you lead the league in picks and also have to get bailed out by terrible calls in the playoffs for you to win it? I don't know. I don't think he was an elite level quarterback that year. No.
Okay.
He turned over the ball way more than I would want a quarterback to.
All right. So back to the question of Super Bowl or MVP. Because Matthew Stafford has won an MVP. Or no?
He hasn't.
Right?
No, he's only made one. He's only made 2 Pro Bowls, and one he made last year, which is more of just ceremonial than anything. Again, I'd rather have Matt Ryan than Matthew Stafford. Again, Ryan's not going to throw me out of playoff games. Stafford will.
I'm going to disagree with you on that. If we're talking because prime Matthew Stafford, I would take over prime Matt Ryan. And I would take the career.
Matthew Stafford, before last season, when again it was a ceremonial pick, made 1 Pro Bowl. He led the league in interceptions more times than he made Pro Bowls. Think about that for a second. Led the league in interceptions more times than he made Pro Bowls.
If we want to talk about a guy that's thrown a lot of interceptions, but also has won a Super Bowl, where does Brett Favre fit in that list?
Okay, here's the problem again. Brett Favre won 3 straight MVPs.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we get to the MVP part that also adds to your legacy. Matthew Stafford doesn't have that at all. Again, he the same amount of times he made the Pro Bowl, he led the league in interceptions. He threw 20 interceptions, 19 interceptions, 17, 16, 17 during his worst seasons, which are significantly more than a lot of other players in the league. Well, yes, Favre did throw a lot of picks. He also won a lot of games. So I do think it matters when you're winning MVPs. You can't win an MVP when you're not winning any games. When was the last time an MVP missed the playoffs? Probably never. Matthew Stafford football did not result in playoff games for the majority of his career.
All right. So I'm sticking with Super Bowl. That's, to me, the legacy. When you view who has a Super Bowl ring, to me, that's affects the legacy. Because that's the championship. It's no matter what, you get to the championship, no matter how you play in the regular season, you and your team find a way to win. That's how I view it. That's all
your team. You make a great point. Your team.
Yeah. But also, you're still a part of that team.
But Kevin, it doesn't. Let me put it this way. Let me give you a scenario. Okay, a guy wins 2 titles, but is horrible in both titles, but wins them. Does it matter? Does it matter that he played bad?
I don't think Eli Manning was horrible.
I'm not. That's not making any comparison to any player. I'm asking you a question.
Okay.
A player wins 2 titles, but is bad in both titles. Does it matter?
It does matter.
Then it would be MVP is more valuable. Because you can't be bad and win MVP.
But what about an MVP that doesn't win in the playoffs?
What's your definition of doesn't win? A title? Or
he doesn't make it to a conference final.
That ever happened?
I'm not going off a player. I'm just saying.
I think that at some point, yes, it matters if you don't win. Like if you're losing in the first round or second round of the playoffs or the divisional or wild card every year, yes, I'll give you that. If you can't contribute at all in the playoffs, sure. But that I again, football is a team. I think when we get to the top 10, top 5, I'll give you, I do think Super Bowls matter more. But that's because all those guys already have 2, 3 MVPs already. So they already have established themselves. They can be the best player during the regular season and the postseason. But if we're talking about right, the playoffs at most has 4 games. And you have a team that is on your side that can be amazing. Again, I bring up Trent Dilfer. Peyton Manning was arguably the worst quarterback in the league that year. He threw 9 touchdowns and 17 picks in the year that he won the Super Bowl. And Nick Foles started 3 games in the regular season. You have to take the wear and tear of an entire season if you're an MVP and then try to go win it. Again, in the Nick Foles situation, he's healthy. He's perfectly healthy. You know how when they get to the playoffs, everyone has bumps and bruises. No, I don't think Nick Foles did. He played 3 games. I don't know. That's the preseason length now. So I think if we're talking about top like 30 to 15, I think MVPs matter more. If we're talking top 10, I would say Super Bowl. Because again, by then they all have MVPs. So the difference between 3 MVPs and 4 MVPs is what? I don't think it's all that important. But the difference between 1 and 0, I do think is a very large gap.
I'll go in general. I would rather have Super Bowl over MVP just because
for
of
legacy.
the importance for legacy. Yes, absolutely for legacy. Huh?
I disagree.
Okay, you'd rather have MVP for legacy.
If we're talking about having 1 MVP or 1 Super Bowl, if that's the conversation, yes, I would rather have 1 MVP for legacy. If we're talking about who's the better player, not what I would if I was a player, that's a different story. If I was a player, I would want 1 Super Bowl. Obviously, every player does. But if we're talking about which player is better, just in general, a player with 1 MVP or a player with 1 Super Bowl, we're talking about quarterbacks, obviously. We're not talking about the second string running back or something like that. In quarterbacks, I think the player in general with 1 MVP is better than the player in general with 1 Super Bowl. In which case, I think that Super Bowl was less important than MVP.
I'm going to stick with Super Bowl given just the importance that the narrative and just the importance that getting that championship matters and the importance of doing that. And because that kind of goes to the Peyton Manning debate. He has 2 Super Bowls. Before he got his second, he had so many more MVPs than his brother, but people still viewed Eli Manning as the better quarterback given the Super Bowl record.
Did people?
I think there was that debate. I don't. Well, you think Matt Ryan's better than Eli Manning, so
yes, I do.
Well, so you don't hold Eli Manning in a high regard. There was that debate. I remember hearing that debate there will be that debate of is Eli Manning, if Peyton Manning ends with 1 Super Bowl and Eli Manning has 2.
Can Eli Manning play good for 4 games with his team also playing amazing around him? Yes, sure. I'll give you that. Can he play well for an entire season? Probably not much, not that often. It's, again, the playoffs are, if you lose 1 game, have 1 bad game, you're out no matter what. And more times than not, Eli did that, except for 2 runs that he was admittedly very, very great in. Again, one of them, he had 6 touchdowns and 1 pick. The other time, he had 9 touchdowns and 1 pick during those runs, which were both of those very good numbers. Very good. But again, if you're like 6-1 and 9-1, Matt Ryan had 9 touchdowns and no picks in a run that he lost. And again, I don't think he was necessarily at fault for losing. But again, there's a lot of people in the media that are very much like, no matter what, the loser is the loser, and they can't be better no matter what. So even if it is a team sport, which it obviously is.
But yeah, I think given the high stakes in the playoffs, that the Super Bowl impacts legacy more than MVP.
I agree with, if we're talking about player plays bad in those moments, sure. But again, I don't think Matt Ryan did. That's my point. That's why I don't think it matters if you win a Super Bowl in the case of that, because you're not playing bad. You're not the reason why you're losing. If you're actively shooting, again, the Joel Embiid in the playoffs 5 for 18, yes, I'll give you that. Okay, it doesn't matter that he's won MVP now because he's playing horrible in the playoffs. But if you're playing good and you're not the reason, But it's a team sport at that point. It's aw shucks.
There is that aw shucks, but I'm just gonna say Super Bowl MVP over MVP or Super Bowl over MVP.
Again, I think Mike Trout's better than Corey Seager. It's
Hey.
again, it's all shucks moment.
Well, how many rings does Mike Trout have?
Yeah,
Or
Corey
you can
Seager
also-
couldn't be as good as Mike Trout if he tried. So
All right, well, that's a video for another day. I'll let you close this one out.
yeah, thank you guys for listening. Kevin and I disagree again. Let us know who you think's right. Is Kevin right? Is the Super Bowl more important in a 1-to-1 comparison, or am I right where it's MVP for legacy, obviously? Thank you guys for listening, and please catch you in our next video.